So I have, for me, one of the things you talked about patience and not rushing them, which is what you did. Um, I had my attendants, and they are, for them it's a job. I mean, they were very caring. I was very lucky to find good attendants. But when they were feeding him, I mean, after a point he had to be fed. And for them, it's just, I want to be done with the feeding. So I would tell him, no, let him, or even when he was eating, I never wanted to take away that ability for him to be able to do that, but they would start feeding him because he's taking too long. And I would say, no, let him take an hour to eat. That's okay. Because he would sometimes forget while eating, he would forget that he has to swallow, or he would forget to take that food and put it in his mouth, and they will start feeding him. I said, no, just remind him gently. And so these are other things that we should be mindful of. Yes, it is not always possible. I understand, like I say that, in my case, I had someone taking care of him, but if you have a million things to do and other responsibilities, sometimes you don't have that time. So again, you have to kind of deal with that.
Yeah, there's a balancing act that you have to try to accommodate. To one of the things in that, if they don't exercise those skills themselves, they will lose them. And so I wanted my wife to be able to be as independent as she could be, as long as she could be. And so little activities like getting herself dressed. But at the same time, if she struggled with those things, I did not want the anxiety of the experience itself to become overwhelming and difficult for her.
Yeah.
And so, I would hand her, her shirt and her pair of pants and let her put them on, as long as she seemed to be able to do that. And then when there were moments when it, seemed like she was struggling with them, at one point, she tried to put a bra on like it was a pair of pants. And you want to, of course, you have schedules to keep too, because I had to get her to daycare and I had to get our son to school. And so you can't, dawdle too long, but also you don't want the experience to become overwhelming for them. And so it's like a balancing act. You want them to keep up their skills as long as possible, but you don't want them to have too much anxiety and too much difficulty in those moments. And so you take over when you feel like it's necessary to take over, and you kind of nudge them along when you can, and you know that you're not always going to get that right, because it's going to change, it's going to progress along the way.
Yeah, you're right. And for me, when my dad, talking about eating, when COVID arrived, when the pandemic arrived, then we eat with our fingers, Indians. So it was difficult I was paranoid about him not, his hands not being clean enough, and he would not let us, it was becoming more and more difficult. So then we had to take over, so you said, we don't want to take over everything that they can, there were a few things that he could still do for himself, and I don't want to take that over, but I had to decide. But then there was this one day, after many months of him letting us feed him, and suddenly one day he asked for it. He said, no, I want to eat. And we let him, and I started video recording it, because for me, it was like my child having one big medal or something like that. He's still able to do that. And again, while bathing, but the attendant would call me, look at him, he was having a bath, and we would fill up a bucket and he would pour water. We used to pour water on him, and he started doing that himself. And that was for me, oh wow, he's doing this and he's soaping himself. Every little thing becomes special, because that is the sad thing about dementia, because they lose some of the basic things that we take for granted.
And that's one of the things, is that dementia will always progress, but it doesn't progress evenly. It'll sometimes progress in a little step at a time, or in a big step, or sometimes they'll seem to have lost certain abilities, and then for a moment, for a day or two, they get them back, or they seem to get them back. They have like this moment of clarity that all of a sudden they're acting like almost nothing is wrong, and that it's still there. And you'll see it as they get tired later on in the day. The symptoms will come back, but you find ways to enjoy those moments when you can.
So Did you ever have, did you have to deal with aggression at any point? Because that is another problem. I had to, so I'm just curious how it was for you.
We were pretty lucky through most of the experience. She really didn't fight with us too much, and I think it really is toward the end, um, when, and especially when the pandemic hit and she was home with me, but also just in the last few months, that's when she started getting more argumentative. It became more difficult to help her get dressed or undressed and showered, and she didn't have very many words at the time, but sometimes she would just get frustrated and she's, I'll just go. And she would try to leave. Luckily, she did not wander away, but she would try to leave the house, or she'd try to walk out of the room. And um, toward the end, it got more difficult to help her take a shower because she was fighting me a little bit. She didn't understand. And I was bigger than her, but I was not really in a position where I wanted to be having to hold her down, restrain her, I was very concerned about that as it progressed. We were lucky through most of it, but we had a few moments. And I think, the only thing I would tell people is, if you're dealing with that, you can talk with the doctors about medication changes. And there are certain medications that will help with that. You have to experiment because they affect different people differently. Some of them have some really rare but scary side effects. There are some of them that, well, there are heart issues that they're contraindicated with this medication, with this other one. But when you get to dementia in the later stages, you have to, balance one concern versus another. And so the 1 in 10,000 chance that there's going to be a serious heart issue versus your day-to-day experience and the difficulty that they're going through is something, it's a balancing act. And so there are different medications you don't want to, we made some changes in the medications, and that helped with the aggression some toward the later stages, but it also had her walking around really almost like a zombie, very slowly. She was walking toward in the later stages with kind of a lean to one side. And that's part of the progression of the disease anyway. And it's kind of hard to tell the difference between disease progression and the effects of a medication. You end up doing a lot of experimenting, work with the doctors, and add this, subtract that, whatever you need to do to make the day-to-day manageable for both yourself and your loved one. That's all you can do.
I agree. I completely. This is another topic that keeps coming up in our forum, in our group here. There are people who are completely opposed to giving medication, but I have met other people where it's like it's about their sanity versus, you need to preserve your own sanity, and the situation is too volatile and it needs to be controlled a little bit. You have to consider that. And I think the thing is, a lot of the concern here is it makes them drowsy. So sometimes they keep sleeping. So it's either extreme aggression or completely, like a zombie sleeping.
Yes, and you have to worry about that, of course, also if they're ever hospitalized for any reason. My wife was in the hospital for a few days after the first time she had a seizure, and she had came out of her seizure in the ambulance, not understanding what was going on, and she started fighting with the medical technicians. And so they ended up giving her some medication to calm her down, and they had to give her some medication to have her calm enough so that they could get an MRI and see if there was any damage from the seizure. And at one point we realized they had her on so much medication that it was the meds that were keeping her all loopy, and at one point she slept for close to 20 hours straight. And then when they backed off of the medication, she kind of came back to, she still had dementia, but she was coming back to her baseline and to what she had been before. And the seizure, it seemed, hadn't really done much damage. You have to just work with them, and you have to advocate for your loved one, and just do whatever's necessary. I mean, I think for many of us, we want to do this with as few meds as possible. But you also need to do what you need to do to manage the situation. There are behavioral things that you can do. I mean, there are some wonderful videos on YouTube by Teepa Snow.
Yes.
And there are some where she teaches people how to interact with the dementia patient, how to once you learn some of these techniques, if you're able to be patient enough and to implement them, you can head off some of these behaviors, and that way you can keep your loved one perhaps on fewer meds than otherwise would be necessary. But what the disease is doing to the brain is still happening, and so you do have to be aware. I mean, you're not in control of all of it, and not everything can be controlled with behavioral approaches. And so if you need to, you do what's necessary, whether it's meds or whether it's patience or, meditation or prayer, whatever works for you, you do what you need to do.
Yeah, with my father, he was never on medication. I tried very briefly, but even for the dementia itself, he was prescribed an Exelon patch, and I saw all the side effects that it could have, and you get kind of scared. That's one thing in India, you don't get that paper, with all the, in the US, you get those pages and pages of what it could do. Here, you don't get that. So it's on you, really. But except when he had an infection or something, I had some challenges because the capsules were too big, and I would ask for a liquid alternative. And also there's not much awareness here about how it needs to be consumed, because these are things that I learned in the US, that some medications cannot be powdered and mixed and all that, but people do that anyway, and I started doing it. Initially I was very, it's always a balancing, right? Okay, now he's not going to take this antibiotic and he needs it, and he's not going to let me give it to him. I would hide it in food. That's one thing we did. So did you have issues giving her medicines?
Yeah, there were times when, there were some pills that were difficult for her to swallow. Some of the bigger ones, especially when she was put on seizure meds, because there was one of those that was a really big pill. And you can talk with the doctor or the pharmacist. There are some that are available in liquid form,
Yes.
and then some that are available, and some of them you can grind up into a powder, especially if you're having trouble getting them to take it. You can grind up into a powder, and you can mix it with either yogurt or applesauce or some other, or pudding. But you have to be careful and look at the instructions on the medication, because some meds are not supposed to be ground up, and because they're time release or whatever. And so you have to make sure you talk to either the doctor or the pharmacist about what kind. And some of them are available in multiple formats, and you just have to ask. But one of the things we learned is, like, sometimes those other formats, even though there is maybe there would be a liquid version of it, but it would never be available, or it wouldn't be covered by, here in the US, by insurance. And so you would find those kinds of difficulties. Toward the very end, when she when I had Becky was in the skilled nursing facility, they had more trouble giving her meds, and they won't force them. And unfortunately, when she's not taking the meds, and the meds were helping with the behavioral issues, that made the behavioral issues worse. And it just becomes this unfortunate cycle that, didn't help anyone. And so most of the time we did okay, but you just have to be aware of what your options are. Crush them if you need to, as long as they're ones that can be. Find liquid versions if you have to. And make sure that you're aware of any interactions the meds might have.
That is one thing that it's not as sophisticated in India here. And so there's not even an awareness that, I don't think even if I go to the pharmacy, it's completely a different system here. So I stopped worrying about it. That's just you do what you are able to do, depending
Yeah,
on where
and I
you
think
are.
that's something to be aware of is, I know there was one medication where we would get warnings, and of course you have to remember that the side effects that you might see on a list of medication are usually very rare side effects. And so even though some of them can sound serious and scary, they're usually rare. And so you don't always need to worry about those. And you have to understand when to balance the thing that the medication is helping with and the potential for a side effect. But one of the things to just be aware of is that if you have someone who has a terminal diagnosis anyway, if you can make their lives better, then you need to find a way to do it. And if there is a potential side effect, I mean, you hope that that kind of thing doesn't happen, but don't let it keep you from helping them with their experience, with their day-to-day experience, because that's all you have. You have each day. I was always more concerned. I mean, I would love to have had 50 years to live with my wife and have her, but that wasn't going to happen. And I would rather have had good years. And so I was always concerned more with the quality of life that she had rather than, the quantity. And if something, was concerning or scary with a medication, you had to balance it against the improvement that you would see with your loved one and what was available to them.
I completely agree. And you refer to this, when you were talking about use of force. I think you kind of referred to it peripherally. We're talking about, Babe, and you were stronger than her, but you were very mindful of, using force. But with my dad, I tried not to use force, but there were instances I had to, especially if he was going to, wander away, and sometimes he would not listen to us, and he's going to fall or something. And also changing him. Sometimes he would not let us change his diaper, and he soiled himself. And, I was very particular about infection and keeping him clean, and he would just not cooperate. And so dementia sort of helped because he would forget about the whole episode instantly, because he would feel better once we changed him. And then he would just lie down, and he would have been exhausted from that experience anyway. So he would just lie down, and he would be a different person in a few minutes. So that was okay. But I tried to keep it to the minimum and give him as much control over what needed to happen, what was being done as possible. So I just kind of wanted to mention that. So
yeah, and I know that very often people don't like if you compare a dementia patient to a child, but sometimes that comparison is really useful. You're the one who has still the cognitive skills, and you have to sometimes make those decisions for them. And sometimes you have to do what is necessary because you're dealing with the complete repercussions of the whole situation. You're dealing with the long term. And you have to keep them, of course, from hurting themselves or hurting someone else. And if they're flailing about, or if they're doing something that might be dangerous. I think I mentioned in the other conversation that we have, my wife toward the end would go to sit down, and there was not a chair there. And so she would sit down on something that wasn't a chair, and she could really hurt herself. And so I'd try to catch her, and that's when you start worrying, okay, I'm bigger than she is, but I'm not really strong enough to pick her up and carry her around at this point. And so you have to be careful of, okay, you try to remember what you can do and what you can't. Here in the US, if you really need to, you can call 911, and they'll help you lift your loved one and simply lift them and put them somewhere if you need to. I worried. There was one time when I thought I might need to do that because I had her in the shower and she refused to come out. And she was just sitting on the floor of the shower, not coming out. And what I finally did, I turned the water off, and I had gotten myself more upset than I wanted to be, but I just let it wait. And once she forgot everything, why she was angry, what she was upset about, if she even knew, once she forgot, then I was able to get her out of the shower, and I ended up not having to call. But I know that people sometimes have had to do that, and usually it'll be the fire department will come out and they will help you lift your loved one and help them put them where they need to be into a safe place.
I've had this kind of situation with my dad too. My dad was a strong person, even though he was 95, 94, he was strong. So there were times he would just get up, and then we are trying to make him sit on the bed or whatever, and he would just fight us and then end up on the floor, So, and then he would not let us, he's angry at that moment about something. And sometimes I would just leave him alone, because he was able to sometimes, he was pretty strong. He would hold on to things and try to get up, and then he would not let us help because he's upset about something. But then you leave him alone and he's a different person again after, like your wife, they forget the whole experience.
Yeah, sometimes 10 minutes will do wonders. Just give them 10 minutes.
Yeah, and also when there were times I had to, talking about, I've heard this, don't treat them like children. I did. He was my child. He became like my child. I was not meaning to treat him like a child. So when I listen to my videos, my tone is different. I'm not talking to him like I'm talking to an adult. I'm using certain words and certain expressions and a tone of voice that I wouldn't use. I'd probably use with a child. I had to. There were times when he has hit us, pulled our hair and things like that, and I would lose my patience too. So I remember telling him once, try to keep my calm voice, because I had learned that if I lose it, it's going to make the whole situation worse. He's not going to understand and learn. So I would calmly tell him, you just hit me. Did you know that you hit me? And you also, that I'm strong and I can hit you back. And so can the lady who is helping you. She's a nice lady and we are all trying to help you. We are all trying to be friendly here. We are talking to you calmly. So, that was just, I'm not saying that it's going to work for everybody. I'm not saying that it always worked with me, but actually a lot of times he heard those words and he tried to control himself, but I could see him struggle. It was nothing to do with us. There's something in him that is making him angry at that moment. And he was really trying to calm himself, but it was because I didn't lose it and I didn't start yelling at him.
If you see the way that the really good professional caregivers work, you can see kind of something in their demeanor. There's this quiet, upbeat confidence that they speak. And I know, the first time when we went and took my wife to the adult daycare center, and she didn't want to get out of the car. She did not want to go to this place. And I thought I was going to have to fight to get her out of the car. We had pulled up, and the executive director came out, and she was very cheery, and she opened the car door and said, "Hi, Rebecca, come on in. I need your help with something." And there was this confidence that she expressed, like she knew what was going to happen. Everything was certain and final. There wasn't a doubt. She wasn't requesting that my wife come in. She was, it was a command, but it was also a very positive command. And she was asking, and Becky would always go with her. And it became, and I saw the people who worked with them. They developed this kind of demeanor. They developed this way of interacting with the dementia patients that it was just calm and confident, and at the same time very upbeat. This is what's going to happen, and they usually got compliance that way. And that's I think they got people to work with them.
Children are like that too, right? They behave better with other people.
Yeah. They can see the fear if we have it. Yeah.
Yeah. So I want to talk about when people come, other guests visit. I've had to train them a little bit, because they always would, initially when I moved here, people would always start with, "Remember me?" They they always feel really happy when my dad accidentally remembers them. And so I had to do, don't ask him that. And I would always tell him who was visiting. This is your brother, this is your sister. And so on, I would always start with, I'm Geeta, I'm your daughter. That was my, several times a day. So what are some of the things that we could tell people, how to communicate with them, and do's and don'ts?
I would just say that kind of question, I would get that a lot. Is like, does she remember this person, or does she remember that person? And I would say that kind of question, it isn't important. It isn't important to their day-to-day experience. Sometimes Becky would remember someone. Sometimes she kind of would just cover, and she would act like she remembered. And so she would remember someone, she would see someone who seemed kind of familiar, and she would just walk up and hug them and everything. And then other times, she would, I know one time when she would walked up and hugged a coworker of mine that we ran into that she had never met before, but she didn't realize she had never met her before. But you don't really, it's not a good idea to ask them if they remember, because that's just going to create anxiety, especially if they don't remember. Exactly. There were times when she would call someone by the wrong name. And I know she called our son by her brother's name one time. It's not the important thing at that moment. At that moment is the very moment that you have with them, and make that moment the best you can. And so just interact with them as you always would have. Very positive. If they repeat themselves, just let them. If they say something unusual, just act like it is normal. But you don't really need to correct them. You don't, and asking them questions to see, that's something for you, and you don't need that. You're going to go away from the experience intact and healthy. Cater to what they need, which is comfort and a sense of normalcy. So I would encourage people not to ask questions like that. You certainly don't want to interrogate people. What do you remember? Yeah. Do you remember this? Do you remember that? Yes. You don't need to correct them if their memories are if their memories are false, or if they seem to remember things that didn't happen, or they think that they're living 30 or 40 years, earlier than what is reality. Step into their world, and it can be a great world. It can, even if it's a fantasy place, step into their world and step into their experience and live with it. And that will be you'll have a much more positive interaction. It'll be a better experience for you, and it'll certainly be a much better experience for the Alzheimer's patient.
I read, I don't know, it's from a book. It talks about this remembering, and this lady would be always asked, does your mom remember you? And for a while she said, yes, she does remember me. And then, oh, that's wonderful. And then it did get to a point where she didn't remember her. She said, that's not important. It's not, there are much worse things than her not remembering me with dementia. Mm-hmm. Her not remembering me is not the worst, but she doesn't remember me, but she knows that I love her and I'm someone who cares about her. So that is,
and I would say, honestly, in the last year of Becky's life, and she lived with our son and I don't know if she could have told you who we were. I don't know if she could have said our names. I don't know if she could have said the relationship that we had, that I was her husband and Lucas was her son. But those things weren't important. What was important is that we were the people here taking care of her. We were the people here who comforted her when she was upset or anxious. We were the people here who took care of her on a day-to-day basis, who made her life better when we could, who did fun things with her. That was what was important. The specific relationships, whether she understood those, that didn't matter anymore.
Yes.
It really didn't. And bringing it up only creates more anxiety. You want to leave that to the side, and that's for you to worry about.
I think that is a progression that happened with you as well, right? And for me also, that you went to the basics. right? She felt safe with you. She knew that you loved her and you will take care of her. So, but for you, that became enough at some point of time, you know? Um, so that's pretty much that was my experience also. Another thing I learned was to not ignore them when we had guests over. They tended to do that people tend to do that. And they have feelings. It's not like they don't know anything. And my dad would be just quiet, and he would know when he was being ignored, and he was able to express it sometimes. People have forgotten me. That's what he said once.
And don't talk about them in the third person in front of them. That's rude, regardless of who it is, what you're doing. You don't do that. And big crowds of people, if you have someone over, or if you're going over to some other place, that can create, you're out of the routine. You're in some, an area where anxiety can rear up. And so make sure that you're around and available to them to comfort them when you need to. We would have an annual party for the Super Bowl each year. And so my wife would she loved to interact with her friends, and she was an extrovert, and she liked to be with them, but it could get a little bit much. It could get a little bit difficult. And so sometimes you have to take a few minutes out and, let her, bring her to the bedroom and a quiet place and give her a few minutes of quiet to resettle. And then she can come back out. And, one year she just took a nap while everyone was here, and that was okay. And almost everyone really is very understanding about that kind of thing. And if there's someone who wasn't, I would question, why are you spending time with that person? Because that's not someone who is an empathetic person. You don't want to be around them, and you certainly don't want them creating anxiety for your loved one. So all of our friends, when they came over, they were very aware, and they would help keep her out of it. I mean, I know one year when people came over, and my wife kept wanting to sit down on the coffee table, which wasn't stable. And so we were concerned that this thing was going to fall apart. We had to kind of keep her, bring her, oh no, sit here, don't sit on the coffee table. But most people are very understanding and aware. And dementia now is so common that many people have dealt with it in some fashion themselves. It may have been a slightly different experience because people take different personalities into it. But people have many people have experienced it themselves, and they're usually very understanding about those kinds of things.
So you have pretty much somewhat answered the question that I was about to ask, is what are some of the ways in which people could help, like friends and relatives, and because you mentioned, your friend taking Rebecca out for lunch. And so what are the different ways that people could help? Because sometimes people don't know, because they don't know dementia, they don't know, they just stay away.
And sometimes it depends on the stage of the disease. In a lot of the early to middle stages, my wife was still spending some time at home alone, and she had lost her driver's license, but she was still able to be home. And really the biggest thing that we needed, friends would come by and pick her up, and they would just take her on a trip to Starbucks, or take her to the chocolate, or take her shopping, or just go out and do something with her. And that could be really, really helpful, just spending an hour of your time, coming to visit, take them to do something, run an errand. It would be helpful to me if I was home, because I would get an hour free to myself. Usually though, I was actually at work. And so, but really it was helpful for Becky, because she was able to have something else going on in her life, something that broke up her, because we talk about they really need routine, but also they need to be occupied. And so you don't want to leave them with monotonous, you don't want to leave them with too much free time and not enough to occupy it. So a friend coming over to later on, I know occasionally people would do meals for us, and that was helpful. Running errands, helping clean the house. You have to make your compromises. And at some point I just decided, I don't care what the house looks like. I want to take care of her. And so the house, looked horrible, and we would deal with that, later on. And so we had people come over and help us clean a couple of times. Eventually we hired someone to help out once in a while, but For many people, you can't afford that, and you have to. And so sometimes just like, offer like, I'm going to come over and I'm going to bring a meal at this time on this day. Is that okay? That kind of thing. Just offer whatever you want, because many of us are not really comfortable asking for help and telling people what you need. And so just offering to do one specific thing. I will come and take her out to lunch. Is that okay? You still want to check in with the primary caregiver, because sometimes other things are scheduled, and sometimes she's having a bad day, and that's not something that would be a good idea, but the person offering doesn't know that and isn't aware. I know we were in the middle stages one time, and my wife wanted to see the new Wonder Woman movie, and we had gone to see it, and she had liked the movie. And then a couple of weeks later, we were in the car and talking, and she starts talking about how she really wanted to see that movie. She had no memory of having seen it. And so I got a friend to take her again. And I had to explain to the friend, okay, well, there are these things that you need to be aware of if you're taking her somewhere. Make sure you're with her. Make sure she knows what theater that you're going to. If she has to go out to the restroom, that you need to go with her, because she might come back to the wrong theater, things like that. And so just, someone to run around on errands is probably the things that would have helped for us the most.
So how did you take care of yourself, get your time away from this caregiver role? Were you able to do that? I mean, do that enough?
Never enough. I mean, in some ways I was, whether it's luck because it brought its own complications, because I was still working. And so that made some things more difficult, because I was trying to balance work and caregiving and raising our son and doing the other things that I wanted to do, and determine which things fell by the wayside. And so I would get breaks from caregiving, because on a Monday through Friday I was at work. At my job, Friday afternoons we would usually have off, and so when my wife had started going to the adult daycare, I let that kind of be my time, and I have a little bit of time in the afternoons on Fridays to not be at work and not be caregiving, and that became my time. I think one of the things you have to do, you have to find those moments for yourself, and when you're caregiving, it's difficult, so just find the 10 minutes. If that's all you can find the 10 minutes to do something else, to calm yourself, to be away from what you're doing. You make sure they're safe, but once they're safe, then you find your 10 minutes. And so I know they'll have that, and it's again, to do the childhood comparison. They'll have the thing when you're a frustrated parent of a newborn. Sometimes you have to put the crying child down in the crib and let them cry for a few minutes, because you're getting so frustrated that you're going to be a bad parent if you don't put them down and take a few minutes away. And so you have to give yourself that few minutes, even if it's only 10 minutes. You also have to find some time, some way to develop your other interests and to do other things. I processed things sometimes by writing. I was writing a column for our local newspaper when this came about. I continued to write that through early 2019. I was writing my first novel, hadn't quite finished it when my wife was diagnosed, and finished it just a month or two after she was diagnosed. It took, of course, another year and a half to get all of the edits and everything done. And then later on, what I found is that it was really important for me to write things about what we were experiencing, because not only can it maybe help some other people, but it helped me process what was going on, helped me understand what I was experiencing, what she was experiencing. And then if it can help someone else, that was even all the better. And so I wrote, a column about her experience. I wrote something about and some of those, it didn't really matter if anyone else read them, but sometimes people did. It was writing for me. And toward the end, I wrote something about her scuba diving, and I wrote, different things about how this experience affected our lives. And the other caregivers, you can give them a voice, by doing that. You can give them an understanding of what they're experiencing, a way to put it into words that maybe not everybody else can. I found that I wasn't writing for them, honestly. I was writing for me. And that became something that was important to help me through the whole process.
Yes, I mean, that's well said, because I feel the same way, and I talk about my experience. Not everybody is able to share openly, but most people want to talk to other caregivers, and they're able to, they feel understood, because it's a shared experience that you cannot talk about this with everyone else. So I think that is, we're getting close to our time, and I mean, we can talk about anything else. Is there anything else you would like to share with us? I know we talked about a lot of tips and based on our experience, and I think you have talked about a lot of that in your breathe in and breathe out, and I that you wrote. So anything else that you would like to share?
No, I mean, I mentioned again the artwork that she would do, helping her find purpose and meaning. The scuba diving that she continued to do through the first couple of years after she was diagnosed. That was a scary thing for me to let her continue to do that. But it was important for her to continue to live her life and to find purpose and meaning and joy in her day-to-day experiences. And so I would just say again that what you're able to do is the thing you have influence over is that day-to-day moment, that each moment in time, you can let yourself get frustrated and make yourself and your loved one more anxious and more frustrated. Or you can find moments of joy. You can find moments of happiness amidst the chaos. You can help their experience. You can help alleviate the anxiety. And the choices you make along the way aren't really about the long-term impact of the disease. They're about those day-to-day moments, and make those as best you can.
Yeah, thank you. I agree with what you're saying. That's the only thing that we can control, right? I think this teaches us to live in the moment more than we may have in the past.
That's probably a lesson I'll spend my whole life learning, to live in the moment, because I'm not good at that. And I don't even use the word control, because you can't control the moment, but you can influence it.
Right.
Because sometimes what's happening in their brain, no matter what you do, they're going to have a problem, and they're going to have a difficult moment, and they're going to have a difficult experience. But you can make it better, or you can make it worse. And sometimes you can be so frustrated that you don't feel like you have a choice about what you're doing, and you make it worse. And then you have to forgive yourself and move on, because they still need you.
I think you say that in your that poem. You plan, but be ready to change your plan, right? You have
to plan ahead, but then be flexible and learn to change on a dime, because what's happening with their brain will change on a dime, and their experience, and they can be in a good mood and then in a bad mood, and you don't get control over that. You have some influence over how you react to it.
Correct. So, Edie, are you there? Any questions from you? You've been quiet.
Yeah, I've been quiet, but I've been listening. No, I think you guys have covered just a huge amount of material. And I think if anyone, as people start listening, they'll get some help from it, because there are a lot of good practical suggestions, as well as attitude suggestions. And sometimes you need one, and sometimes you need the other. So I think that was lovely.
Thank you. So thanks again, Mike, for joining us today and giving us your valuable time and sharing your very emotional experience. And I think it will be really valuable to all those who listen, because I think today we had a lot of practical tips in how to find those moments of joy, create those moments of joy, and So I want to also wish you on your memoir, wish you all the best on your memoir. I know you've been writing a memoir, and I hope you find a publisher, and I look forward to reading it when it gets published.
Yes, thank you. I'm hoping one way or another to get that out. I have self-published before, and so if I need to do it that way, then I'll find a way to get that out. And you know, whether it's only family or friends, but I think it's something that might be able to help other caregivers. And
Yep.
if I can do that, then I'd like to do it.
Yeah, I'm sure it will, because I've read most of your articles and I've learned from them, and I think I look forward to the book. Thank you, and you have a wonderful day.